All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting in-depth review. For those of you that, for some odd reason, haven't looked at the thumbnail or read the title, today we're going to be doing an in-depth review of the new Transformers source book, which I actually have the hardcover copy with me. The Decepticon Directive. Now, if you do enjoy this stuff, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super important. Now, my in-depth reviews are exactly that. They are in-depth. They say the things that I like, the things that I don't like, the things that I think they did well, the things I think they need to do better. But a lot of people don't want to sit through a 2-hour-long video just to figure out if they want to buy something. So I always start them off with a section called Should You Buy? And I separate potential buyers into 3 different groups. The first group is what I call players. Players are people that are going to be sitting at a table and primarily, not exclusively, but primarily are going to be playing a single player character along with a team of other players. They have different needs than, say, the next group, which is what I call GMs. GMs are going to be someone that's going to sit at a table and primarily, not exclusively, be sitting in the GM's chair, where instead of playing a single character, they're going to be playing all of the NPCs, and they're going to be designing encounters and writing story and things like that. They have a much different set of wants and needs than players are going to have. And then there's a third group that I think is very commonly overlooked when marketing a lot of these books, and that is the lore hounds. Lore hounds are people that may never sit at a table, but they're really interested in the story behind the RPG product or the world that it's set in. And I know a lot of people that will buy books just to read all the cool lore and look at all the really cool art. I've had friends that have purchased things like the Monster Manual for various editions of D&D that have never actually played a game, but they really like looking at the art and all of the lore that they put into those Monster Manuals. So obviously they have a different set of needs. So, should you buy this? Well, let's find out. I just realized I don't have my water, so get my water. How am I supposed to say moving on without taking a drink after? It just doesn't work. So, the first group. Should players get this book? For players, for the most part, when I'm considering whether or not players should buy a book, sorry, just getting the actual page up so I can do things like talk about the price and all those fun things. When I'm talking about players, generally the things that I consider most useful for players are going to be things like new character options, whether that's new classes for just RPGs in general, new classes, new abilities, new feats, or they effectively call them perks in here, things like that. Those are the things that are generally going to be most important to new players. Lore can be very useful for players too, because it can help you create a new backstory, but in general it's not going to be quite as useful as mechanical benefits. And one of the things I always like to take into account, which I mentioned in one of my other reviews of new Essence 20 stuff, where I talked about the Jump Through Time Power Rangers book, where I mentioned that A Jump Through Time is very much a campaign setting as opposed to a rules expansion. What I meant by that is, yes, it does give you a lot of new character options, but most of those character options are themed and really require you to have some sort of time travel influence in your game. And that's how a lot of campaign settings work. If you look at something like Eberron, Embers of the Last War is I think what it's called. They have a lot of really cool character options like the Dragon Marks, which is effectively new kind of sub-races for your characters. However, the Dragon Marks are exclusively tied with the Eberron campaign setting because The dragon marks are for the various houses in Eberron that have political control. These are really strong, powerful houses that do things like that. And so it's extremely heavily tied to that lore. And if you're doing something outside the world of Eberron, you'd have to change quite a bit of stuff to make the dragon marks work, because they're designed to work in that kind of system. They give you benefits for interacting with the other houses, which if the other houses don't exist, there's really nothing for you to do with them. And a lot of other stuff too. So for the Decepticon Directive, this book kind of follows very closely with how the Cobra Codex was set up. And in both the good and the bad. If you've watched my in-depth review for that, you're going to hear me repeat quite a few the things here. Though I do have to say, the Decepticon Directive is probably easier to read than the Cobra Codex, specifically because of that equipment loadout thing that I talked about in the last one. We actually had one of the designers show up in chat and kind of make their own case for why they decided to do it how they did. So if you haven't gone back to that video, look in the comments. One of the comments starts out with, "Hey, I helped to write the book," or something like that. Read their comment. And then I did have a reply after it where I gave my own opinion on what they said and kind of reinforced my opinion on it. But I think it's important that when these people are willing to take time out of their day to listen to me rant for 2 hours, and then also go and explain one of the things that I had issues with, we need to acknowledge that is going above and beyond. So if one of the designers for the Decepticon Directive decides to comment on this, I highly recommend you read all their stuff, because again, these are the people that made it. And when you understand the thought process behind what they were trying to do, sometimes it makes it a little bit easier to get them to work the way that it was intended. Because I'm reading this, I didn't help make it at all. I'm just reading the text here. And so I am going to impart my own interpretation on the things, and sometimes my interpretation is different than the one that they intended. So yeah. Anyway, so going back to should players buy this? I consider the Decepticon Directive, and I can't remember what I said about the Cobra Codex, but I consider the Decepticon Directive a little bit closer to a rules expansion than a campaign setting, despite the fact that this is about Decepticons and everything. The thing that makes me put a little bit more towards the other one is most of the options you have here can be used in a Transformers game. Like if you want to play an Autobot with any of the options that you have here, they're going to be a much more kind of anti-hero style Autobot, but you 100% can do that with almost everything here. Whereas with something like a Jump Through Time, there are quite a few options where if your campaign had no time travel in it, those options would be useless to you because they require time travel. So that being said, as far as what are players going to get out of this, kind of the same thing as the Cobra Codex. This book does a really good job at explaining a very different style of evil campaign. Cobra and the Decepticons are very, very different groups, but they are both evil organizations that have kind of a... Not really. Like, Cobra is more of like a terrorist organization where they're trying to kind of break down everything and rule over all through fear and terror. Whereas the Decepticons, they use fear and terror a lot, but a lot of what the Decepticons are doing is much like, if you look at the fight between the Autobots and Decepticons in its various incarnations, a lot of times you kind of have like a War of the Roses style thing where you have one person that's been put in power, and that's generally whoever is Prime, Optimus Prime generally, but you have the people that are in power, which are considered the good guys, and then you have the Decepticons, who are considered the bad guys, but a lot of their arguments are based on the idea of the people in power are not taking care of our needs, and the people in power are illegitimate for this reason, and this reason. Now, compared to something like the War of the Roses or the 100 Years' War, where it was a much, it was a much more political thing. Decepticons are obviously bad guys. So you're not quite going to get that, but you do get different motivations from Decepticons than you do from Cobras. And so this is going to be, if you want to play, like Cobras fit into kind of an anarchist archetype where, they're mad at the world and they want to bring the world down. And some of them want to bring the world down so that they can rule it. Some of them just want to bring the world down. The Decepticons are much more about control and uniting with effectively, like a lot of these people, if it wasn't for the fact that they were fighting the Autobots, would not be partnering with each other. And so a lot of the Decepticons are allies by convenience. And so if you wanted to play a character that's much more kind of focused, instead of just kind of being, let's overthrow, this kind of disgruntled, hey, we're on the, we're second-class citizens kind of thing. Revolutionaries, I guess, could be the positive spin on what they're trying to do. They're trying to overthrow what they view as a corrupt society. And so because of that, this does have a lot of really great resources if you do want to play a character that is very much kind of disgruntled and has decided that like might makes right is the overall kind of theology behind the Decepticons. Whoever is the strongest is the one that makes the rules, and whoever wins, they're the ones that were in the right. People have used that as justification for conflict for millennia. It's unbelievably common, and just because you're subscribing to that that specific mentality doesn't mean you're on the wrong side of the conflict. There were quite a few might makes right people on the quote-unquote right side of history, where they're doing things like fighting for freedom and for justice and other things like that. It's a very, very self-focused, very, if you guys have ever heard me talk about the alignment grid in D&D and how a lot of people misunderstand how to use it, the idea of an evil character is not that evil characters do bad things. Evil characters are very self-motivated, and might makes right is a very self-motivated ideal, because it's very rare that someone that believes in the idea of might makes right is ever a weak person. It is generally reserved for people that have strength and power. They may not be the most powerful, but they have enough strength and power that there are people weaker than them that might makes right gives them a benefit. And so, yeah, as far as players are concerned, as before, there are new influences, origins, and roles. We're going more in-depth when we actually do the in-depth part of this. But there's also a brand new role called the Raider, which again, one of the things I love about the PDFs is I was just on the table of contents. I just click on new role Raider, and it brings me right there. The new role, again, is geared, lore-wise, is geared towards Decepticons, but there's absolutely nothing that would stop you from playing an Autobot Raider. Again, you're just going to be much closer to the anti-hero side of heroics than you're going to be like an Optimus Prime kind of lawful stupid almost paladin style character. If anyone doesn't know what lawful stupid is, look it up. It's a whole thing. But yeah, so anyway, overall, with all the new options and everything like that, the options in here, like I said, not only are they good, they're a little bit confusing, which again we'll go through when we do the in-depth review, just because of how they do stuff. And they do follow the pattern that the Cobra Codex laid out almost to a fault, where unlike the G.I. Joes, where everyone's part of a Joe, there's all these little subgroups that are built up inside the Decepticons, and that makes things a little bit more complicated. Again, we'll talk about why I think that's both a good thing and a bad thing when we do the in-depth review, but another thing's a little like that. But overall, I think it's a good book. The new character options, once you learn how to read them correctly, are not bad. I still think this would be a significantly better book if instead of mentioning, oh, you have to replace all these features from the original role and put in these new ones, they just reprinted the original roles in here with the changed features, the book would read significantly easier. But again, we'll go through that when we go to that. Other than that, I think the book itself is great. The actual physical copy of this particular book, I'm looking at it right now in Renegades in the US. It's $45. And as of right now, as I'm recording this video on the 29th, which is a Friday, at 1:30 in the morning, because that's when I'm conscious, it still says for a limited time, orders will come with a PDF copy of the Transformers role-playing game Decepticon Directive Sourcebook at no additional cost. Renegade does this with, I believe, every single one of their books. Every book that I've bought from them, I have both a PDF copy and my physical copy. I like my physical copy. And I've never bought a PDF ever. I just get them for free because I pre-order all the books, or I'll buy them shortly after they come out. This does eventually end, and I have no idea when it will end. So there'll be a link in the description down below if you want to get the physical or the PDF. I'm trying to see if, because before it launched, it has officially launched now. Before it launched, they didn't actually have the PDF on its own for sale. Generally, the PDFs are around like $25-30. So you're going to save like 15-20 bucks on getting the PDF. For players, do I recommend this? I do. I think there's a lot here. And even if you don't want to play a Decepticon, you can use almost all the stuff here in your Transformers games without needing too much to change things. A lot of the stuff in here is geared more towards evil characters. So if you're playing a good character, they're going to have to be kind of a gray character to be able to use most of these things. But overall, they're not horrible. They're not stuff that you exclusively would need to be a Decepticon to play them, which I think is good. So my recommendation for players, $40 is not a bad price for a rules expansion like this. So I think the physical is worth it, especially if you can get the PDF. If you're not a big fan of books or just really enjoy having digital copies, which I really enjoy having digital copies, then definitely the PDF. But I could say, you know, $45 is not outside the realm of reason for how many more options, because I believe they have a brand new focus for each one of the existing roles, and then the Raider, I think, has 2. Does it have 2 or 3 foci? Yeah, so it only has 2, but again, it's a brand new role, so it doesn't really surprise me if they only put 2. The other ones only have 2 until you get the Decepticon stuff. So yeah, overall, players, I do recommend getting the physical book if you're into Transformers and everything. I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. So, moving on. The second group, should Game Masters get this? As I mentioned, for a lot of the stuff I said in Cobra Codex, just really kind of applies here. This this book does explain remarkably well how to run an evil campaign. One of the most difficult things for most players, and definitely for most GMs, is running an evil campaign. Because first of all, a lot of players don't understand how villains work. A bad villain is really, really simple to understand. They do bad things. And to be perfectly honest, they're massively boring to fight against. There's no reason to really tip them off, because in any real world, a character whose sole motivation is I do bad things wouldn't exist, would probably not survive to adulthood, because they would do bad things as a child, which would eventually get them either arrested or killed. That's just how it works. Real villains are incredibly complex, and they tend to be very self-motivated. They tend to view other people as expendable and as tools that they can use. And the motivation behind and the motivation that brings them to that conclusion is always very, very interesting. One of my favorite characters I got to play was Javert in Les Mis, and Javert is an evil character. But he is a villain, but he's not technically an evil character as far as the alignment grid is concerned. I consider Javert a lawful good character, because the motivation behind why Javert treats people as poorly as he does is he worked in a prison, and he saw prisoners constantly, and he constantly had this idea reinforced of once a criminal, always a criminal. If you were in jail, you deserve to be there, first of all, because he believed in the rule of law above all else. That's that whole lawful aspect. And he believed he was justified in treating these people poorly and ensuring that they stay in prison forever, because that was what was best for the rest of the world. That was the selfless aspect of him. And so this character, just having a character that hates Jean Valjean is boring, but the idea that he focuses all his times on, well, he's a criminal, and criminals don't deserve second chances, because when you give criminals second chances, they betray you again, and they just do the same thing they did before. Once a criminal, always a criminal. Once a thief, always a thief. If we give you a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, doesn't matter how many times, how many other chances we give you, you're always going to be what you are. And that is his own motivation. And so running an evil campaign requires you creating these motivations that give people a legitimate reason to do the wrong thing. Valjean was arrested because he was starving and he stole a loaf of bread. Does that mean he wanted to steal or anything? Or that if you give him the opportunity to do it again, he's going to steal? No, he did it out of necessity. And when he was taken out of the situation that forced him to do that, he never did it again. He became not only an upstanding citizen, he became someone that actually helped society as a whole. He became a mayor, and he created jobs for people and gave people really good paying jobs and treated people fairly. Like, he was a wonderful member of society. Creating situations where the players can logically choose to make the wrong decision and do the wrong thing for the right reasons is very, very difficult. And there are other much more villainous characters that exist that are especially less altruistic, let's say, than someone like Javert. You look at like Destro from Cobra. He's very much kind of an anarchist. He hates war, and he hates people with lots of money and things like that. And so his goal is he's just going to sell really, really good weapons to everybody and watch them kill themselves. So he's helping fund world wars and things like that, but he's doing it because he thinks the people waging the wars should all be dead. And he thinks that this is the easiest and most effective way to do it, and he's making shit tons of money doing it. That is a really interesting evil-based character. Very self-motivated. I've decided that these people don't deserve to live, so I'm going to do what it takes to make sure that they don't live, and I'm going to benefit all while I'm doing it. So going back to the Decepticon directive, it does give you some really good ideas about how to run an evil campaign that's not going to involve the players imploding. A lot of evil campaigns in RPGs implode because the characters go, well, I do bad things, and backstabbing is a bad thing, so I am going to backstab the other player here, and they always turn into PvP styles stuff, and they always end up fighting each other, and it always ends poorly, because they don't understand that evil characters can work together with other characters and still be evil. Cooperation is not an exclusively good thing. Bad people cooperate all the time. That's how gangs work. So the idea that if you're going to be running an evil campaign, something like the Decepticon Directive, very, very useful. Now, if you already have the Cobra Codex, again, a lot of the stuff here is rehashed. I will say again, it's hard to explain why, because my brain's not working, but Decepticons have very different motivations than Cobras. So this will give you a different kind of flavor of evil campaign. A lot of Decepticons, loyalty is a big thing in Decepticons. It isn't really a thing in Cobra, aside from a few very specific ones. The Decepticons are significantly more unified than Cobra will ever be. Cobra is a conglomeration of a bunch of different groups. The Decepticons is the Decepticons that happen to have subdivisions in them. So it is a different style of evil campaign. And chapter, what is it, 4, I think it is? Yeah, chapter 4, it's called Decepticon Campaigns. Does go through a lot of how to create an evil campaign that still feels fun, still feels rewarding. Because a lot of times when the bad guys win, the reason that we play these games is so that we stop seeing the bad guys win. In real life, bad guys win all the time, and it's really not fun. I mean, just look at our country currently. The bad guys have won repeatedly throughout history. It's impressive how often the bad guys win. And this is not exclusive to my personal country. Look around the world right now. We have examples of the bad guys winning over and over and over and over again. It's not fun to watch the bad guys win, and it happens far more often in society than we'd like to admit. And so the reason that we play these games is so that bad guys don't win. So that we, the people that feel a lot of times powerless, especially when we were talking about world problems, and society-wide problems, things like bigotry and stuff like that, you know, you feel powerless as a single individual, and that's where you play RPGs. Playing an evil campaign, you're playing the people that you don't like. And so you do have to kind of set up an evil campaign in a way where it doesn't feel like you're playing the people that you want to lose. And I think this does a remarkably good job at giving you a nice outline of how can you build an evil campaign that's not going to implode and is not going to make you just feel bad afterwards going, great, so we just effectively increased the cost of insulin for no reason. You don't want to be that person. So yeah, and then you also, there's a bunch of new threats in here. I have been surprised with, because again, I've been running RPGs for like a decade now. And when I say I've been running RPGs, I don't mean like, oh, I read a book and then, once a month or something. I mean, I have been running 2 or 3 simultaneous campaigns a week for 10 years, in addition to, I think about for 4 years, I went to like half a dozen to a dozen conventions every year and would spend, in a weekend, I would spend anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day for 3 to 4 days doing nothing but playing and running Dungeons and Dragons. I have thousands of hours spent specifically running. This is not prep work I'm talking about, specifically running games. I have thousands of hours that I've done. And every RPG I've ever run, there are boring monsters and there are fun monsters. And depending on the RPG that you're talking about, the collection of fun monsters to boring monsters will vary, or the ratio between fun monsters and boring monsters varies wildly. I've got to say, at least for D&D, the ratio of fun monsters to boring is heavily, heavily weighted to boring, especially 5th edition. And I love 5th edition. I think it's a fantastic version of D&D. I think it's the best designed version of D&D that has ever existed. It is by far the best selling. But there's a lot of boring monsters in there that you really have to create other situations to make them interesting. Legitimately, I really haven't found that many boring threats in the Essence 20 system. There are some, but they're relatively few and far in between. Which is good because compared to some other systems like maybe the Cypher system or especially something like Open Legend, designing threats for Essence 20 is a little bit more in-depth than some other thing. It's not nearly as bad as designing them for 5th edition, but so I generally don't design custom threats for Essence 20 games. I like to reskin. It's easier for me. And again, there's really not a ton of quote-unquote boring threats. Most of them are interesting. They have descriptions on how you're supposed to run them so that they're not just going to be, okay, he runs over here and he attacks. They all have different things that you can do, and the different damage types and stuff like that means that combat is always interesting. And I really think it has to be a compliment to the designers that, first of all, they designed a system that allows you to create these threats that are just interesting and fun to run. And second of all, almost all of the officially published threats have been interesting. Not all of them can be interesting. Not all of them are supposed to be interesting. There should be boring monsters. There should be kind of cannon fodder style enemies that just show up, do something simple, and they're really just there to harass the players, drain them of resources. That is something that every single RPG needs. So I'm not saying that there are no threats or anything like that, or even that there shouldn't be any of those that are these kind of boring one-dimensional threats. You have to have those in every single RPG. It's part of the fun, is having, the ability to kind of turn your brain off for like a round in combat and just go, okay, I'm just going to kill these things because that's all I need to do. But the threats in this have been really interesting and fun to play and fun to run and things like that. And then the final part of it is Adventure in Disguise is just another intro adventure. And again, I have to say the Essence 20 people know how to write a good introductory adventure. I haven't reviewed a ton of their non-introductory stuff, basically just Adventures in Angel Grove, which was okay, but had some problems with it. But their introductory stuff, which is probably the most important adventure that you're going to run, and if you were like me, or if you want to be like me, you don't, trust me. But in this particular instance, if you want to start going to conventions and things like that, getting a few intro adventures under your belt where you can just run them at a drop of a hat is unbelievably useful. You will become one of the most popular people at a convention ever, especially if they're short adventures. An average convention adventure runs 4 hours. And that's because that's how long the time slots are in most conventions. They have started switching to 2-hour RPGs every so often. I've never been a huge fan of them myself, but they are really, really great. If you can find an adventure that you can run in like 2-ish hours, they're really, really great to run during lunch between adventures. Everyone can sit down and get some food, and it's especially useful if you have them memorized well enough that you don't have to have the book out the entire time. But yeah, those make you really, really popular. Just, after the convention is over, late at night, you can get together with a bunch of people in a hotel room and run an adventure, or, waiting for a panel, especially if you're doing something like SDCC, where you can be in line for panels for 3 or 4 hours, depending on the panel. Being able to just sit there and run either from memory or because you have the physical copy of the book, and just leaf through it really quick and have a single set of dice for everyone to share, you become massively, massively popular. And then also being able to go to convention organizers and negotiate to get free hotel rooms and free tickets to conventions. Like I have never paid, or no, I've in my life I've paid for a convention ticket once, and that was because all I wanted to do was be a player and not run anything. That is the only time in my life I have ever paid, or twice, because I went to Gen Con and did that too. Gen Con and one local convention I've ever paid for. All the rest of them, and I'm talking dozens upon dozens of conventions I've gone to, I didn't pay for my hotel room, and I didn't pay for my ticket. I just ran adventures for the convention. And so getting a few of these introductory adventures are great because people don't have to be familiar with the system. A lot of times they teach the system while you play, so you can literally just go up to a convention, before the convention starts. I gotta make sure you do this before the convention starts, weeks before, months before preferably, and go, hey, I'd love to run some games for you guys, if you'd be willing to give me a free ticket to the convention. And you get to go to a convention for free. It's super fun. So anyway, so overall, do I recommend GM's pick of this book? Yeah. I do think, again, if you're not into, like, if you're getting this specifically to kind of figure out how to run an evil campaign, you can kind of choose between this or Cobra Codex. They both have a lot of the same information. There's enough overlap where I would feel bad if the pure purpose of you getting this is to just get that how to run an evil campaign. Choose one or the other. But if you're interested in Transformers, the physical book, definitely worth it at $45. The PDF, which again, somebody found the cost of the PDF of the last one. So in the comments below, if you guys can find the cost of the PDF, my brain is shot. This week has been a nightmare for me, mentally, and just lots of bad stuff happening. So if anyone can find the actual cost of the PDF, just put it in the the comments so that somebody knows what they cost. But anyway, $45 I think is worth it. And like I said, right now, as of me recording this, you can get a free PDF, which is nice. Anyway, moving on. The third group, should lorehounds buy this? Again, with Essence 20 in particular, they are really, really good at mixing in lore with mechanics. They are nowhere near the... and I joke about this because Renegade also publishes the Vampire the Masquerade stuff. And I've not read the new Vampire the Masquerade books. I hope they've made them easier to read. Because the old Vampire the Masquerade books were novels that happened to have game mechanics hidden in them somewhere. And it was a pain. You had to read the entire book almost cover to cover in order to build a character. They're really interesting, and there's a reason why White Wolf was the #2 publisher in the 90s, and were very quickly coming for D&D. They're great books. And again, now they're published by Renegade. Yeah, that was just, it was not fun. Essence 20 stuff, I feel, has the right balance of lore to mechanics. It's very easy to find where the mechanics start if you do just want to build a character, but every single mechanic in the game, with a few very rare exceptions that are really necessary just for the game to work, because it is a game. Almost every mechanic in this has a lore justification for why it exists. And it really feels like they went from the lore to design the mechanics, which a lot of times for RPGs, they design the mechanics and then write the lore to fit the mechanics, and it always comes off as awkward or weird. Or they'll just write the mechanics and then the lore is a completely separate thing that doesn't really have anything to do with the mechanics. And so from a lorehound perspective, that means that almost any Essence 20 book is going to be enjoyable to read. Depending on the book, some are going to have more or less lore, depending on how many new mechanical things they have to introduce. But even the final adventure in this is still interesting to read. Even though half of the adventure effectively isn't in there, because half of the adventure is reacting to what the players do. So overall, like, I have a hard time not recommending Essence 20 books for lorehounds, because there's almost always going to be something interesting in there. And again, when you're dealing with these these evil archetypes, which really don't generally tend to be focused on too often. I had somebody mention that like Vampire the Masquerade is kind of an example of like an evil style campaign. Yes and no. When you really get into the kind of the lore and everything about Vampire the Masquerade, the player characters themselves are still good guys. They're just good guys in kind of a very morally gray society. And the only kind of truly evil characters tend to be really, really powerful, like members of the Coterie or things like that. Like the player characters can still be, like you can have lawful good vampires, and you can have chaotic good and everything in between. The vampires themselves, especially, I have not played a lot of any of the White Wolf or World of Darkness stuff, but I've watched quite a few of the live plays and I've read a ton of the books. It's very rare for me personally to see a quote-unquote evil campaign where they're actively trying to do things that you would defend as evil. A lot of times they are good people that just kind of exist in a morally gray world that unfortunately are predators. The vampires are predators. They have to feed on other sentient beings in order to live. And so they're good people that are forced to do morally questionable things. And depending on how morally questionable you want to get, will kind of fuel how you play your character. But I really don't consider Vampire the Masquerade or Werewolf the Apocalypse or Hunter the Reckoning, any of those games, I don't really consider them evil campaigns. I consider them much more kind of morally gray situations where you're allowed to do bad things, but you're still generally good people, or vampires or werewolves or hunters or whatever you want to be. It's exceedingly rare for for an RPG member to give you a guide on how to run evil campaigns. It's just generally not done. I don't think I've ever seen a D&D book that was designed to let you run an evil campaign or help you to run an evil campaign. The closest I've ever seen is like Dark Sun is a very, very dark dystopian world, but you're still the good guys in that. If anyone can come up with some good examples of books that were specifically published to help you run evil campaigns, let me know in the comments down below. But this, I've got to say, is I think probably the only ones that I remember doing it. And they do it well. And again, from a Lorehound perspective, which is what we're supposed to be talking about here, they're really interesting to read. Because again, I played villains when I was an actor. I almost exclusively played villains. And they're a ton of fun once you start getting into learning about their motivations and just how really complex and interesting the characters are. And so seeing a lot of the stuff that I had to teach myself about how to play a good villain written down in ways that are relatively simple to understand is really impressive to me. These resources didn't exist when I was an actor. Let's put it that way. Or at least I wasn't aware that they existed. I had to learn it from other actors that had played villains. I had to learn it from my own exploration of villains and the text itself, and speaking with other actors and directors and things like that. I had an amazing list of directors that helped me to learn how to create interesting, compelling villains that people want to hate. And it's a really rewarding process. And yeah, like I said, finding a book that kind of lays it out like that is really interesting. And it's weird that it's laid out in an RPG book and not in like, the Ultimate Guide to Acting for Villains or something. Something like that. So no, yeah. So for Lorehounds, do I recommend this? Again, for $45, I don't have a hard time recommending the book. I think you will get $45 worth of reading out of this. Because it's just, again, there's a lot of really interesting ideas and a lot of, especially if you do read the lore behind the influences and the origins and things like that, there's a lot there. So, yeah, and then obviously the PDF is worth it as well. So, moving on. Do this every time. I want to try and make these a more digestible time period, and I'm never able to get through this first section in less than like 45 minutes. So, quick recap. Players, I recommend, if you're into Transformers and Decepticons specifically, get the physical book. And even if you don't want to play a Decepticon, there's enough here that you can use in your Transformers stuff. For GMs, yes, with a caveat, if you're going to be running Decepticon stuff, this is really, really useful. Or if you're going to be running an evil campaign, this is really useful. However, if your goal in getting this is just to get information about how to run an evil campaign, you can kind of choose between this and Cobra Codex. Both of them outline very similar but different versions of evil campaigns. So if the sole reason for this, pick one or the other. Otherwise, yeah, the physical book is definitely worth it. The PDF, obviously, it's cheaper. And then for lore hounds, again, I recommend if you like Transformers lore in general, $45 for a physical book is worth it. It's a great book, and it's really interesting and fun to read, and there's tons of great artwork. Because I have the physical book, I can actually show you guys some of the just crazy, amazing artwork. Like, look at this stuff. Look at that. Isn't that amazing stuff? And I've had someone point this out before to me. A lot of the artwork in here is not stuff that's made specifically for the book. A lot of the artwork they take directly from the comics and other sources like that, which I think is really, really cool, because you are kind of opening people's eyes to a world that they may not know exists. Like, a lot of people think of Transformers as a kids' TV show. They have no idea that there's been a comic book around since the 80s that is still going. So, yeah. Anyway, that's all for that. If your only goal in watching this was to get a recommendation about whether or not you want to pick it up, thank you for showing up. Please remember, again, like, subscribe, turn notifications on, all that jazz. In the comments down below, what is your favorite evil character? TV, movies, video games, whatever. They were a bad character that you really, really liked. Whether they were a bad character that turned good, whether they're a bad character that was always bad, doesn't matter. As long as at one point they were considered one of the bad guys, let me know in the comments down below. Now, it is time for our in-depth review. As a reminder, the in-depth review is exactly that. It is in-depth. I am going to go chapter by chapter, sometimes page by page. I'm going to talk about the things I like, the things that I don't like, the things I think they did well, the things I think they need to do better. This is a very long and involved process. It generally takes a couple hours. I do put timestamps in here. I know YouTube wants me to force you guys to sit here through the entire thing and never leave YouTube, but it's just not cool. And I would never want to do that to you. So feel free to watch this in parts. I will have every chapter broken down, so you can start on chapter 1, chapter 2, and then come back whenever you like. But that being said, I think it's time for us to dive in to the Decepticon Directive. Chapter 1. The Decepticon Movement. And the intro. There is an introduction. It is a grand total of 2 pages. The first page is kind of similar to the Cobra Codex. I think the Cobra Codex is written a little bit better. I read the entirety of the introduction for the Cobra Codex. This one, I'm just going to read the first paragraph to kind of get you an idea of what the introduction is like. But it says, "Stand up, bot! Are you just another cog spinning in the perpetual oppression machines of the primes? No? Then get up off your fender, pop into something faster than neutral, and wear the brand! Cybertron isn't the shiny star bauble it once was, even if the big rigs upstairs want to sell that lie to you." And it goes on from there. Again, I think the Cobra Codex had a little bit more convincing argument, and it might just be that giant robots fighting against other giant robots for the rights that they feel that they have maybe doesn't strike as much of a chord as people that are disenfranchised with a society that doesn't appreciate them. disability rights. Yeah, but it's still a good introduction. And then the introduction, Megatron says rise. It just talks about all the stuff that you'll find in the book. And then we get to chapter 1, the Decepticon movement. And it kind of describes the Mesrea of the Decepticons. You know, why do they exist? They do the same thing that they did with Cobra, where the first thing they do, like the first heading in the Decepticon movement is the Decepticon faction divisions. And there are a bunch of little subgroups. Like you have the Warlord and the Conclave, the Cybertron Guard, the Seekers, the Rainmakers, the Insecticons, Soundwave's mini cassettes, the Reflectors, the Combiner Assemblies. There's all these little subgroups that generally just don't really exist for the Transformers. And part of that becomes very confusing very quickly. And the Cobra Codex took it to a whole level where you actually had to choose which little subgroup you belong to, and that would actually influence some of the equipment you get. Like, it became very, very confusing. This one, it's a little bit more of a role play choice than it is a mechanical choice, as far as I can tell. There are certain origins that are going to say, well, these tend to be the Rainmakers, because the Rainmakers are all jets. So if you choose the kind of aerial origin, then you're probably going to be a Rainmaker, or a Seeker or a Rainmaker. So there are some kind of quote-unquote mechanical things that are tied into them, but it's not that bad. But I do think, and it took until reading this book to kind of understand why they kept putting this emphasis on, well, we have to split up the Cobras and the Decepticons into all these little mini groups. And it's because evil organizations in general are rife with infighting. Because they are all very self-motivated characters, infighting is going to be a way of life, and especially the idea of might makes right. It is very rare. Actually, it's effectively impossible for a single being in existence to remain the same kind of competency and, for lack of a better term, power level for the entirety of their life. As you grow and learn and change, you are going to be able to influence people in different ways. And there are going to be some things that influence you that change over time. And so in an organization that is very self-motivated and believes in the idea of might makes right, who is mighty at one point is not always going to be the mightiest. Because in a society as a whole, certain things are going to give you power. And it's not always entirely physical strength. It's one of the reasons why I like might makes right as opposed to like the strongest survive or something like that, or the strongest make the rules, because might doesn't generally have to involve whoever is the biggest and the strongest. Power comes in a lot of different forms, and what might make someone extremely mighty and powerful at one point, when society changes a little bit, they are no longer in the top spot and they become very, very weak. We see this in real society constantly. People that were at the top of the influence game for the longest amount of time are now social pariahs. Probably one of my favorites just because of how wrong she was. I'm not going to name her personally because I hate the idea of like dogpiling and stuff like that. But there was a Kickstarter for a video series called Feminist Frequency. And the leader of that is an insufferable, know-it-all, condescending asshole who made up bullshit to make herself look more important and look more knowledgeable than she actually was. She had very little knowledge of video games in general. She would pick and choose little aspects to make herself look like a professional victim. And nowadays, very few people even know her name. Feminist Frequency has not put out videos in forever, but when, like, she did a Kickstarter and raised, if I remember correctly, she raised either hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And she was being interviewed on television and things like that. She was one of the biggest names in video games. And now she's not. Nobody cares about her. I believe she never actually finished what she was supposed to even make. And everybody now understands that she was just a drama peddler. But because of how society was there and the fact that she just jumped on the bandwagon of Gamergate and a bunch of other things like that, she was able to ride that thing and become incredibly powerful. And her saying things could massively change things. She could get people demonetized. She could get people canceled and things like that. She had a ton of power, and now she doesn't. Rightfully so. I don't think she ever should have had power. I have an extreme disdain for this person. That being said, the idea of power constantly changing feeds into the idea that you're going to have little subgroups. And we see this again in modern society. The idea of feminism is not a complete term. You have a lot of different kind of subgroups in the overarching plot or the overarching term of feminism. And certain subgroups inside, they all call themselves feminists, but you're not a real feminist. And, well, I don't like you, and I do like this person. And these are the good feminists, and these are the bad feminists. This type of infighting happens in real societies constantly, but it's going to be magnified in any group that requires, that is built on the idea of selfishness and kind of supporting yourself over other people. I'm not saying that's how feminism works. I'm saying that is my segue into back into Decepticons. Because it is a very self-motivated group of people, you're going to have these little subgroups of like-minded people that band together because there's strength in numbers. But and all of them are going to band together and to become the Decepticons, but they're also going to be playing against each other. And like I said, it took me literally getting ready to record this review to figure out just how important it is to have these divisions in Cobra and in the Decepticons in order for you to be able to play an evil campaign, because you need to have constant bad guys, and the constant bad guys cannot be the Autobots, because the Autobots just don't do enough bad things to motivate you to do more bad things. They're good guys. They're generally going to do good things. And good guys are remarkably easy to work with. To be blunt, generally good people and honorable people, remarkably easy to work with. Even if you have ulterior motives, as long as you are dealing with generally good people, they're remarkably easy to work with. And again, evil people can do good things if it gives them what they want. So yeah, there are a lot of genuinely good people that have to deal with evil people and are very easy to work with. Because again, dealing with honorable people is remarkably simple. You can trust them at their word and things like that. So anyway, there has to be division within the Decepticons. That's how it works. The Decepticons cannot exist as a self-motivated organization if they're not having infighting. And anytime there's infighting, people are going to form cliques. That's how it always works. If you think of like a high school, high schoolers in general have very little power at all, except amongst themselves. They're very much like the Decepticons. And so you can have the entire student body get together and do something, but more likely than not, the jocks are going to stick with the jocks, and the plastics are going to stick with the plastics, and the goths are with the goths, and the band geeks are with the band geeks. You all have these little in-groups that'll sometimes work together and sometimes work apart. You know, during the musical, a lot of the jocks will work with the band geeks because they need the pit orchestra in order to be on stage so they can show how pretty they are. And that's the same thing about the Seekers and the Cybertron Guard, and the Tremorcons and all these other things. And so, again, the first time I read this, it annoyed the hell out of me. Because I'm like, why do you have to make this so complicated? But as long as they're not tying the nonsense equipment loadouts, which they don't in this book, thank God, to it, this really is a positive thing. You have to have these little subgroups. You have to. And if the party you're running all comes from the same subgroup, that's useful. But if they come from different subgroups, that can make your campaign that much more interesting. And to be perfectly honest, that much more difficult to run. Because in general, if you have two different groups that have been working together thus far, but then something happens and half the players are in one group and half the players are in another group, then you have just created inter-party conflict, which can be really interesting in an RPG or can end campaigns. So again, be careful when you are running your evil campaigns. You need mature players and a mature GM in order to be able to run them. But this kind of infighting is just so good. And you need these different little things to do that. So yeah, that's all of Chapter 1. Moving on! Chapter 2! Decepticon characters. This is by far the longest chapter because, to be perfectly honest, I would love to see them split in future books if they do stuff like this. Again, I doubt they will because this is a huge book. I would love to see them split Chapter 2 into bare minimum. I would like to see them split it into actual character options, as in influences, roles, and origins, perks, and equipment as a separate chapter. Because this chapter is by far the longest. If we look at the, if we actually look at the table of contents, I'm actually going to figure out. So, Decepticon Movement, Chapter 1 is 7 to 21. So we're talking about 14-ish pages. Decepticon Characters is page 21 to page 69. So we're talking about, what, 48-ish pages. Equipment is 69 to 83. Decepticon campaigns are 83 to 113. And then the longest chapter is technically the threats, but that's because each threat has its own page. So Decepticon Characters is by far the longest chapter aside from threats. And it is the most content heavy. And I think just if you were to... where I guess they do separate equipment into its own chapter. I just feel like there's just too much in Chapter 2. Anyway, let's go back to the actual chapter. I'm just very, very tired right now. So the first thing they do, their character creation thing, they talk about, the first thing they actually go into are the influences. And again, these are going to be similar influences to what you saw in Cobra Commander, but still different because, again, Cobra recruits very different people than the Decepticons do. Like the hangups they have here are like Extremist and Fanatic, which both would kind of fit in there. Then you have things like Gutter Champion, or my personal favorite, Nemesis. Nemesis, your origin is basically there's an Autobot that you hate and you are constantly fighting against. You are the one that just keeps showing up and has this vendetta against a specific Autobot. And I think it's really, really interesting to have a character whose sole kind of motivation is, well, I don't like this one person, and therefore whatever team they join, I'm joining the opposite team. And that 100% is a real thing. I have met people like this. They're remarkably unpleasant to be around. I don't think they're evil people. They're just unpleasant. And so I really, really love that is one of the things that should show up here. And I don't think that was a thing in the Cobra Codex. Again, my memory is shot. But I think it's a really cool origin. You could really use it in any evil campaign. I really, really like that. But, yeah, The influences in and of themselves, I think, are really, really cool. And then you have other things like Recruiter, which I thought was really interesting. And then other stuff like Refinery, Laborer, and stuff like that, or Trader. They have some new hang-ups. One of the things I actually kind of prefer about Transformers versus any of the other systems is in the other Essence 20 systems, each influence will have a corresponding perk and a corresponding hang-up. In Transformers, they have a just kind of generic group of hang-ups, and each influence will have like generally 2 or 3 hang-ups you can choose from for that particular one. And they do have mandatory hang-ups in this one, just like the other advanced books, which are basically if you take this particular influence, you have to take this hang-up, even if it's not your second or more influence, which I think is really interesting. It's a way to balance out really powerful influences. But yeah, they introduced some new hang-ups, which I like. Which again, if you're creating your own influences, which is remarkably simple in the Essence 20 system, you can use these new potential hang-ups in there. And there's really cool ones. Like one of the ones that's kind of interesting to say the least. Always Hungry is a hang-up where you constantly want to be ingesting Energon because you're a robot that feeds on Energon. Or Show Respect is another hang-up. And I'm just going to read the actual hang-up because it's interesting. You respect the soldiers of this bitter war, as well as those who seem like they do the same. Whenever a foe rolls a critical success on an attack skill test, you must salute and not attack that foe on your following turn unless they are the only foe present. A really interesting, unique hang-up. So, yeah. Overall, again, there's not that much here that I would consider quote-unquote groundbreaking. It's just all good stuff that makes a lot of sense. And again, if you've never run an evil character, read through these influences and read through the kind of justifications for why these characters would do the things that they do. Specifically things like the Traitor influence, the Traitor bonds, things like a Decepticon recruiter saved me from a certain spark snuffing event. So the reason you were an Autobot and became a Decepticon is because you effectively owe a recruiter a debt that you can't pay. They saved your life, and so you therefore owe your life. A very kind of altruistic way to create an evil character is that you really don't have a thing. Another one in here was I was blackmailed to turn traitor. The only reason you were a traitor is because you did something that could get you in trouble, and now you're being blackmailed into it. And that creates a very interesting, self-interested, self-motivated character. The only reason I'm helping you guys is that you guys will screw me over if I don't. As soon as the situation changes where they can't screw you over, everything about your character can change. So, interesting things like that. The new Origins... I'm going to drink. The new Origins, first of all, are a little bit confusing. And part of that has to do with the fact Origins in any other Essence 20 is basically your race. So it gives you some skill training, gives you your starting health, and sometimes your movement. Origins and Transformers, not only do they do that, they give you your alternate mode. And the alternate modes that already exist in the Transformers core book are a really wide variety of alternate modes as far as Transformers are concerned. Like, you can make almost every Transformer that has ever existed in the stuff that is in the core book. So introducing new stuff, they have to create new systems and stuff, and I think they do it pretty well. But the first one's called Armory Call. And basically, your alternate form is very much like the original Megatron. The original Megatron's alternate form was a giant laser gun. And there have been other transformers. I want to see if they actually give examples of them in here. I don't see any specific examples, but So the Armory Call is basically your alternate form is some kind of item. And they give you four different types of items. You can be a body armor segment, you can be an energy firearm, a handheld shield, or a melee weapon. So you can turn into an armor for another robot, a gun that can be used by another robot, a shield that can be used by another robot, or a weapon that can be used by another robot. And because you change from a character to an item, it changes how things work. Like you no longer have a movement speed. So you are attached to another character. And if you're something like body armor, what do you do on your turn? Well, they do give special attacks that you can do when you are in your alternate form. Things like the special attack for the handheld shield is a shield blast, or the special attack for the energy firearm is a weapon blast. Meaning, when you are if you're an energy firearm, when you're being wielded by an ally, on their turn they can use you to shoot because you are an actual weapon. But on your turn, you can shoot on your own, as far as I can tell. And that's one of the things that makes this so confusing, is they don't really explain how changing to your alt mode and attaching to another person works. I mean, technically it's the transformation skill, which is an action normally, but it's not super clearly laid out anywhere in here. You kind of have to piece it together from different places within the description here. I would have much preferred that they just had like a little box section going, by the way, if you're using Armory Call, this is how Armory Call works. When you're in your alt mode, this is how your turn works, this is how their turn works, this is how they're able to use you and things like that, because it doesn't really explain a whole lot here. And it's very, very confusing. I'm still not 100% certain how it works. I would have to actually run the game with an Armory Call character to really understand it. And that's what you kind of see. The next one is Drone. You're basically a copy of another thing, so you choose a different origin. And again, it gets a little confusing. It makes more sense than Armory Call, but it's a little bit more confusing, a little more complex. Insecticon starts flirting with the idea of Beast Wars style robots, where instead of your alternate form being a vehicle, your alternate form is going to be some form of insect or something similar to that. Doesn't technically have to be an insect, but something like that. And then you can be a Minicon, which that in and of itself, like Minicons already exist as part of the Mode Master, role. You actually get a Minicon, which acts as a secondary kind of character that you get to build as part of your character when you build him. It's one of the reasons a Mode Master can be such an interesting character to play, because you get an extra character to play. But now you can be a Minicon, and Minicons thus far have been defined by the fact that they are a part of another Transformer. And now you're going to be a Minicon that's not part of another Transformer. And again, it's very kind of confusing to be able to figure it out, because you do get to choose what kind of Minicon you are. And one of them is a firearm enhancement module, and it never really explains how you attach yourself to a firearm. It makes mention of when you lend assistance to targeting skill test attempted by the ally wielding the weapon to which you are attached. You can also spend an energon point to increase the damage they attack by 1. It explains what you can do as a result, but doesn't really explain how you get to that point anywhere in here. And that is really confusing. Again, what I would like to see is just a little text box or thing, because they do that all the time in this. When they introduce something new, they have a text box where they just say, hey, this is how this particular thing works, so that they can keep the writing of the actual mechanics as smooth as possible. Then they go, by the way, in order to use this mechanic, you have to understand this other thing that doesn't make sense for us to just put in there. So you're just going to have this like red box here that's going to tell you about it. And I wish they had done that for the Minicon and for the Armory Call, but they didn't, and it makes it really confusing to read. And then, I mean, they have a couple other origins that are just, again, really, really interesting. The Monstrosity origin, the Salvaged origin, all of them really interesting and fun. Just a little more confusing than I would like. And again, hindsight is 2020. They've been working on this for God knows how long. And they had to design all these new systems. This is an extremely common problem you have when you are designing, is when you've been spending, 6 months, a year, however long you spend on it, designing this thing, you already understand how it works. And this is an extremely common thing for training in general. Most trainers are already close to experts in whatever they are training someone in. And so they take things for granted. One of the things I used to tell my employees when I was training them how to do basic troubleshooting for computers that were brought in for us to fix. The place I worked at, we had a computer repair service, but we didn't actually fix the computers. What we did is we would plug them into the internet and someone would remote into the computer to do the fixing. So hardware repairs were not things we could do in store. We could ship them out for that. Software repairs we could generally do, but in order to get them to the point where we could connect them and download the program on them for the remote in, you had to be able to get the computer working. At least to the point where you could plug it in, turn it on, and open up an internet browser. And so I would have to walk through, because a lot of the people that worked, because it was retail, a lot of the people that worked were younger and had had computers their entire lives. And so I would have to kind of force them, when people would come in, they go, well, what's wrong? Well, it's broken. Well, what is that supposed to mean? And they would just be very good. They'd be like, well, did you try restarting it? And they go, what does that mean? If you didn't grow up with computers, you may not understand what restarting the computer is. Well, of course I restarted it. I closed, I had my laptop, I closed the lid and then I opened it again. That's how you restart it. No, that's not how you restart it. And did you turn off the computer is another one that I really, really enjoyed dealing with. Because people go, yeah, I turned off the computer. I pushed the button on the screen and it went black, so it was off. No, you actually have to push the button on the tower to turn off the computer. All you're doing is turning off the screen, which is probably why your computer is running like Bubkiss right now, because it's been on for 4 years. So yeah, it's extremely common when you are an expert on something to forget that you have, it's one of my rules of training is begin at the beginning and remember to keep it simple, stupid. And the reason I use those two phrases is because you have to begin at the very, very beginning and you have to keep it simple. And I actually had a friend of mine mention, he's like, well, I don't like to use the word stupid because it's insulting. And I said, I don't consider it insulting. I consider it part of the directions. You need to keep it simple, stupid. And the reason the stupid is on the end is because you need to be stupid. You have to break this down into the dumbest, most basic part, because you are eventually going to meet someone that has no knowledge of how this works. There are a lot of things that people have no knowledge of how they work, and they just do it. Something as simple as Tylenol. 90% of the population has no idea how it works. To be perfectly honest, doctors don't know how it works. They just know what it does. Fun fact, most of the drugs that we use, we have no idea how they work. We just know what they do. But most people just, oh, Tylenol, it's a painkiller. It kills pain. I'm just going to take it and the pain will go away. And then they get confused as to why it didn't work. Well, because that's not actually what it does. And the same thing is true about everything, including RPGs. And so when you're creating new, relatively complicated things, you will sometimes forget that you're an advanced user, especially if you are a designer. You're an advanced user. For someone that is not an advanced user, they're not going to understand every single process, and you have to break everything down in the dumbest, most simplest terms. And the trick to being a good trainer is being able to do that without being insulting. It is remarkably difficult to do that. And I just think they missed the mark here because it feels like they skipped some steps here, some very important steps, and I don't understand how some of these modes work. But yeah. Moving on to the role options. It works basically the same way the role options for the Cobra Codex do, where basically you're going to replace their faction perk with Hail Megatron. The faction perk for Transformers is Transformers Roll Out, in my best Peter Cullen impression. So faction perk for Decepticons is Hail Megatron, which is a very, again, very, very different way to do things. And then for each one of the roles, they have replacement perks. And one of the things I would like to see them change in future printings, to give an example, for the Analyst. Well, here, since I have a physical book and I don't have to try and deal with weird stuff, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going, I want page 39. I'm actually going to show you guys in here, because last time I tried this, I cut off half the picture and it annoyed me. So this is what I'm going to do. So, the replacement perks, and I'm not going to show this entire thing for the entire time, but I'm going to move it closer. Replacement perks, you can see right down here. That part where it says Cybertronian perk, taking advantage at the beginning, blah, 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 blah. It says that this replaces work the numbers. And I'll show this again. I'm going to have my finger right under work the numbers. So right there, as you can see, work the numbers is the same style of text and everything as the rest of the stuff here. I would like work the numbers emphasized somehow. Underline it, put it in quotes, bold it, italicize it, something to show that it is different, that it is referencing something else. Because while this is significantly easier to read than the Cobra Codex, that would just make it that much easier. Just something so that when I look at this, I read through it and go, okay, well, that's what I'm going to be replacing. What am I supposed to replace it with? I want something that's instantly going to draw my eye to work the numbers. Okay, so now I go to this other book and I just go work the numbers. I don't use that. I use this in place of it. And it makes it very simple, very clean, very easy. This, I effectively have to read through the entire description to figure out that work the numbers is the thing that I'm going to be replacing. And it makes it that much more difficult to understand when you're trying to build a character. So just do something to take the name of the perk that you're replacing and replace it and bold it, underline, quotation marks, anything to make it easier to know that, hey, by the way, work the numbers is the name of the thing that you're replacing. Yeah, and again, different roles are going to have different things. Like for the Analyst, you really only replace two things. You have you replace work the numbers and you replace postmortem interrogation. Those are the only two things you replace, and then you have the new focus options. But the new focus options are much easier to read because they don't require you to look at another book to understand what they're talking about. Again, another reason why I think they really should have just reprinted the roles in this. Like, don't give us any of the influences or origins or anything like that, but give us just reprint this. It might be useful to reprint at least a couple of the origins, and that would make this a standalone book instead of one that requires the core rulebook to be able to play. And part of me, I don't want to be cynical about this, because again, I've had really, really good interaction with a few of the developers of the books, and they're really, really great people. And I sincerely doubt that this would have been a developer decision. But to me, it kind of feels like they intentionally left things out to force you to buy another book, Whereas if this was a complete book, kind of like if you remember the new Star Wars RPG that came out like 4 or 5 years ago, they had Scum and Villainy to be able to play kind of rebellion style characters. I can't remember the second book, and then the third one was for Force characters. They all use the same system, and you could play games where you would have a Scum and Villainy character and a Force character in the same game. Very similar to how Essence 20 works. The big difference was each book was a standalone game. You could run an entire campaign, create all the characters you want with just Scum and Villainy. You could buy the Force one without having to own Scum and Villainy and still play the entire game and be able to do anything. Each one was its own core book and technically its own system, kind of similar to how Power Rangers, Transformers, and G.I. Joe are separate books. The big difference being G.I. Joe is a different game than Power Rangers. And Transformers is a different game than G.I. Joe. They share the same core function, but they're very much different games. And I really would have preferred to see this as its own kind of standalone evil core book instead of just a rules expansion, because the way that they list things in here is just confusing. And I cannot tell you if I prefer the Decepticon version of the Analyst or the Autobot version of the Analyst, because I have to open up 2 books and compare 2 very different groups of abilities in order to figure out how they play. And to me, that's just really annoying. It makes it very, very difficult for me to be able to understand how these new systems work. Because, again, I'm flipping through multiple books that aren't really designed to work together. So, yeah, that's just my personal opinion. And, again, I'm not accusing anyone of anything. Again, the Essence 20 people have been nothing but pleasant to me, and I've been very much impressed with everything that they do. But this just feels like, well, we're going to force you to buy another book. And I bought this and the other 2, the 3 books that I've done in-depth reviews on. I bought all of them at the same time. They all came a couple days ago in one package because I pre-ordered all of them at the same time. And it was an ungodly expensive, especially for someone on disability. Like, that was the only real purchase I could make this month because it cost me close to $200. And I don't have $200 to spend. So I had to tighten my belt this month to be able to get this information out. And so, yeah, I will get a little bit salty when it's like, well, I probably would have bought the book anyway because, again, I rebuy books all the time. And I specifically buy the books. I pre-order the books so I can get 2 copies of each book, a digital and a... So it's not like I'm not going to be buying these books. You don't have to force me to spend more money on your products. And again, this is nothing to do with the developers, the designers, or anything like that. This, if it was a conscious decision, which I'm not convinced it was, it just feels that way. More likely than not, this is a business decision, not a design decision. So I want to kind of emphasize that. And I have this is just my thoughts. This is my feelings on this. I have no proof. No one has ever told me that this is how it works. It just feels, from my own experience in business and things like that, and especially what's been happening in the market, this feels like a corporate decision. And anyone that's worked in retail knows that corporate is a 4-letter word. And if you don't understand that reference, work in retail, you will. And that's just what it feels like. The book would have been more expensive to make because it would have been longer. And it's already, I mean, look, this is already a decent sized book. So it's not like I feel like the book is too short or anything. It just would have read a lot better if they just had, this is the Decepticon version. Instead of saying replace these things, they just replaced them and showed me so I could actually see how the class is going to play instead of having to try and pair it together from 2 separate books and hope that I'm replacing the right things. Very, very confusing. Something to make this significantly easier is an online character builder, Renegade. Don't know if you guys are thinking about that, but it'd be real nice. Maybe maybe partner with something like I don't know, Nexus maybe by Demiplane, because they already have Vampire the Masquerade stuff. Just putting that out there. I'd like an online character builder for Transformers and Power Rangers, all that. It'd be very useful. Okay, rant over. I'm losing my voice, guys. Who would have thought talking for an hour and a half hurts your voice? So anyway, the new focuses, again, there's nothing wrong with them. They're all really interesting and fun. They do, again, kind of run into the issue of like the two focus, or the two foci for the analyst, or the corruptor and the inquisitor. The corruptor title, well, here, I can do it again. We're on page 40 now. Now that I have a book I can show you guys, this is so much easier when I actually use the damn book. Let's go to page 40. And my camera, I understand my camera's not really set up for this. So, what I'm talking about. If we go here, look on this page, Corruptor. It is the same text color, same size as all of the abilities underneath it. Despite the fact that Corruptor is the focus, and all the rest of these are abilities. They're perks of the focus. So you have, from a visual standpoint, you have Corruptor and the perks being identified in the exact same way, which makes it very difficult if you're trying to find specific things, because you don't know where Corruptor starts or where Inquisitor starts or anything like that. Change the text color, underline it, anything. Give some sort of visual representation that this is something different. If you don't do that, stop it. My PDF is going nuts right now. Really? There we go. Finally. All right. Every so often, my PDF just goes nuts. And it's only the SS20 PDFs. I've never had this problem with any of my other PDFs. So I don't know how you guys build your PDFs, but they are remarkably resource intense. But anyway, so yeah, that's, again, it sounds like a nitpick, but again, as someone that has literally thousands of hours in running these things and have played and has looked over dozens of RPGs and has played quite a few of them, these are the things that are going to be reasons why people don't use this book. And if they're not using it, they're not going to be recommended to their friends, and no one's going to buy it. Like, these are all really important things for you to understand if you want people to actually buy your book, is these little faux pas of, well, we're just going to do this thing where we're not going to differentiate between perks and subtitles. That's going to mess with people, and it makes it more difficult to read, and it makes it less enjoyable to do. Rant over. God damn. I'm just closing it, and I'm going to reopen it, because, oh my lord, is this PDF going nuts, and I don't know why. My computer, I need to clean my computer, to be perfectly honest, because it's been having issues. But let's go back here. Let's go back to roll options. Okay, so yeah, it's like every single piece of the PDF loads separately. Like the artwork loads separately, and the frame around it loads separately, and each piece of text loads separately. Like, there's so many different pieces of this that it doesn't feel like... It feels like they just didn't flatten it. And if they were to flatten it so that the PDF treated them all as one object, it would read significantly easier. Whatever. Anyway, so the rest of them, again, it's the same thing. Like, for the gunner, they have two things that they replace, and then two new focus options. Again, other than the fact that it's really difficult to figure out where the two focuses start and finish, it's relatively simple to understand. They look really interesting. And then the new Mode Master focus one is Mimic, and the other one is Minion Master, which is built around minicons and stuff like that, which I can't remember. I thought that was one of the things for regular Mode Masters too. Configuration, origin, role, Mode Master. So, focus, quick change. Microlinked and triple. Oh, so Microlinked was the one that they had there, where it just had a single minicon. It seems that, yeah, I think Minion Master. Yeah, it just gets you more minicons and stuff like that. And there's actual there's there are there's perks that allow you to even more minicons if you want to do a full like Soundwave, because Soundwave I think had like 4 or 5, maybe even 6 different minicons that they had. So yeah. So anyway, I don't want to spend that much more time on these. They're interesting and cool and Decepticon focused. So you want to do cool stuff with them. I want to talk about Scout, Warrior, new role, Raider. So again, the new Raider, I'm trying to remember. The Raider, well, good example of kind of where the Raider falls. One of their, what I would call a defining ability is called Eye for Appraisal. Whether spotting the most strategically sound forward advancement or seeing the value of an Energon stockpile at a glance, you have an eye for knowing what something is worth to your team or mission. As a free action once per scene, you can attempt a test to gain 1 2 benefit. Know the 3 most valuable items in the scene, or know which 20-foot by 20-foot area in the scene has the best strategic advantage. So the Raider is very much going to be one that can be kind of a klepto rogue style character, or a very tactically minded character, which I find interesting. But it does have a very strong kind of rogue flavor, especially when you go to the Raider Focus option. Acquisition Expert is a thief. And then Siege Master is the other one, where they are, I would say, very, very anti-rogue, because their literal thing is they siege, they take down structures and stuff like that. So interesting, unique role that again can definitely go, can definitely become an Autobot without too much difficulty. The idea of the Gentleman Thief has traditions, literary traditions going back over 100 years. With Arsene, I think his name was. Yeah, overall, interesting, cool stuff. And then we get into the new general perks, which again, for the most part, are going to be stuff that you can use a lot of different ways. I can't think of too many times there are like perks and things like that that feel like they are exclusive to evil characters. Most of these can be used anywhere. And then they have some new minicon perks, because again, part of being a Mode Master and having minicons is they have their own perks and stuff that they get. See more stuff. And that's the end of the chapter. Moving on. Chapter 3. Equipment. One of my favorite parts about this. The way equipment requisitions work in Essence 20 in general is the group has a number of requisition attempts they can make that is generally equal to 3 times the number of players. It is a group resource. So if your specific character doesn't need anything massively complex, you can effectively just not use your requisitions and let another player who needs something significantly more complex for their character. Or if one of the characters just failed their requisitions, like, oh, I've got an extra one, you can use it here. They specifically state in here. I'm trying to see. So here, Decepticons don't commonly requisition their equipment for schemes like Autobots do. They're more inclined to claim what is necessary from a central stockpile, perhaps even from other Decepticons that can run with Starscream. When Starscream says he needs your blaster, you hand it over, right? In game terms, Decepticon characters default to the same standard issue equipment, but gain access to additional equipment through their personal training and ability to make demands of others. They still have personal gear, but can requisition better gear. This allows you to replace or upgrade equipment you are trained to use by requisitioning it if the so-called requisition budget permits. I thought they had one specifically where they say they don't share them. How about quality equipment? Standard mission critical items, claiming new gears. For Autobots ready to head on a mission, their supply store gives them a specific budget to spend on adding items to what they're taking out of storage. Decepticons aren't quite that structured, but they do take time to shake down their subordinates and hoarders to get the same kind of equipment access. The rules for Decepticon requisitions new gear are the follows. Requisition attempts aren't automatically pooled together for the team. Each Decepticon has their own budget, though they can share their attempts if they wish. Decepticon can substitute an intimidation or persuasion skill test to requisition an item, regardless of the normal skill associated with that item, and they suffer downshift 1. So Decepticons can intimidate their requisitions, whereas most requisitions, I believe, are technology rolls. There's a few other ones that you can make, but I think for the most part they're generally technology rolls, depending on what you're making. So I like the fact that Decepticons can intimidate their things for just a downshift 1. And then if a Decepticon fumbles on a requisition attempt, they can't make any more attempts this mission. I love the fact that the requisition system works. Is it my favorite system absolutely in the world? No. And the few times that I've run Essence 20 games, I've run some slight modifications to it. But overall, it works fairly well. There's no reason that they needed to change it. But they did, and all the changes that they made are lore-based. Decepticons don't share their requisition budgets. Decepticons don't requisition, they steal. And if they fumble, everybody points and laughs to the point where they can't get anything else for the rest of the mission. I love everything about this. This is the epitome of the lore. The lore influences the mechanics. And I love it. And I just think it's great. And I could definitely see during the requisition phase of a thing, having the players actively role play out their requisitions, which is not something I think I've ever thought of doing in the other ones. The requisitions are just, oh, I'm going to get this, I'm going to get this. This really feels like you could definitely role play out the requisitions and have some really awesome, fun interactions with it. And then again, they give a bunch of new weapons and stuff like that. A few new weapon traits, very similar to Cobra. And then some new weapon upgrades, some new armor upgrades, you know, new supply equipment. One of the ones I really thought was cool. One of those new support equipments that you can get is called Additional Pair of Limbs, which requires you to either be an animal, a creature, or have the monstrous alt mode, and it just means you have an extra pair of arms. And I just think that's really, really cool, and I think it's great. And then they introduced some new vehicles. Again, vehicles not quite as used in Transformers as they are in G.I. Joe. And then they also introduced new Energon strains, which I thought was really really interesting because they basically use them as kind of one-use items. So a standard Energon cube is just, it has 2 Energon points, which can be siphoned at the rate of 1 energy point per free action. So if you find a standard Energon cube, you can just siphon energy off it. But you have Energon stacks, and then solid state Energon or natural Energon is in there, and they have ways on how to do that. This was one of the questions I had when I first reviewed the Transformers versus RPGs. They mentioned that you can recover Energon points if you find a source of Energon, but they don't really explain how to do that in the book. Well, they do explain how to do that here, and they make it really interesting. But then they also have alternate Energon strains like Dark Energon, Primal Energon, Synth Energon, Toxic Energon. And each one works differently. Each one does a different thing. It's just really cool. And again, it's that idea of adding complexity when necessary. By having the Energon system allows them to refill their points, okay? That's really as complex as it needs to be. There's no real need for you to have anything beyond, okay, this is how you can find Energon and this is how you can use it. But by creating different types of Energon, you now have a slightly more complex system where not only can you find Energon, you can find different kinds of Energon, but each kind of Energon does something different. Like Dark Energon. Dark Energon has many uses, but is primarily a powerful body stimulant. Having at least 1 Dark Energon point grants the user a +1 temporary boost to toughness and evasion defenses, and an upshift on all strength and speed skills. And there's other stuff as well. But Dark Energon is highly addictive, making an attack against the willpower of anyone who uses it, starting with a base skill of D6 and gaining an upshift for each time it's used until it automatically succeeds. And then it has an addiction aspect to the Dark Energon. So without having different flavors of Energon, you couldn't have these additional kind of bonuses built into that. So again, it's that idea of the complexity is just complex enough to allow for you to do something that you can't do without it. But it's not needlessly complex, that it's just adding more steps to do the exact same thing. Using Dark Energon is not like using regular Energon. You don't just get your Energon points. You get a whole list of other things and have to deal with addiction. Same is true of Primal Energon and Synthetic Energon and Toxic Energon and all those other things. They all have additional useful reasons to use them over regular Energon. So yeah. Moving on. Chapter 4. Decepticon Campaigns. Again, this is an entire chapter basically telling you how to run an evil campaign. And again, it does touch on slightly different things, but it starts off with the same stuff. The bad guys are winning, rewards of ambition, a good offense is a good offense, different shades of bad. You know, talking about different things. And they even talk about allies of circumstance. You know, the idea that the reason that a lot of these people are working together is not because they actually like each other or believe in each other. It's because they're convenient. They need more troops, and so the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. And then they have a thing about having fun without crossing the lines. Go through stuff. They have a specific thing about the torture and how it's not cool and you don't need to depict torture and stuff like that. I highly recommend, even if you are playing evil characters that decide that torture is something that they want to do, you don't explain it on screen. You effectively fade to black for it. Because it is, not only is it a remarkably unpleasant thing to experience, even secondhand through description, but it can be extremely triggering to people that have dealt with multiple forms of abuse, because torture uses the same techniques that abusers use when they abuse people. It's the same bag of tricks. So yeah. The other thing I kind of like about this is Selfish with story points. Again, story points is another group resource, and Decepticons aren't team players. And so they specifically have an entire red box here that says, by the way, If the cooperative nature of story points doesn't align with the tone of your campaign, consider rewarding them to individual Decepticon characters instead of having them be a team resource. And I love this because, again, this does not really add that much complexity. It's simply taking something as a group resource and making it an individual resource. You have the same amount of points, and you actually factor how many story points you start a scene off with based on the number of characters. So you're already taking into account how many characters exist in each character. The way you earn story points is by individual characters earning them and adding them to the pool. You're actually taking away a step to turn them into individual pools because they're already tied to individual characters, and then you pool them. Now you're just not pooling them. And I love the fact that something so simple can be done to vastly change how you play the game, because story points being a group resource encourages teamwork. It encourages players to really cheer for when other players do something good and get rewarded with a story point. When I ran Power Rangers Night Sentinels, which was my Power Rangers mini campaign I ran last December, when I ran that, it was impressive just how excited the players would get when anyone would earn a story point, and they would constantly talk to each other when they wanted to use a story point because it wasn't their story point, it was the team's story points. And it created a really great bond. I love it when mechanics hyper encourage the players to work as a team and encourage them to basically emulate the kind of characters that they're supposed to be playing. And that's how Power Rangers works, to be blunt. One of my favorite things about Power Rangers Hyperforce, which was the live play RPG that Hyper RPG did years ago, that was sponsored and produced by Saban, so it's an official Power Rangers season. It's considered canon with the rest of the shows, despite the fact that it happens in an alternate universe, just like Dino Thunder and RPM. Saban considers it an official season. Or Power Rangers now, because Saban doesn't own them anymore. But one of the things they talked about when they were doing interviews about the system is the fact that simply sitting down and playing as Power Rangers made them act like Power Rangers. They didn't, the GM, Malika, didn't have to say, remember guys, you're Power Rangers. Do you think that's what a Power Ranger would do? Simply sitting down and playing the game. And they did not use the Essence 20 system. The Essence 20 system didn't exist, would not exist for years afterwards. This was something Malika made herself, which has never been published. But they sat down and they just started playing like Power Rangers. Simply sitting down and being told that you're the Blue Ranger or you're the Red Ranger and things like that. They were so into the system. They were such big fans that they just instinctively became Power Rangers. And I think things like story points, I think really well-written lore, I think mechanics that are influenced by lore as opposed to lore that's influenced by mechanics, I think all of those things help to create an environment that highly encourages players to play the kind of characters that would exist in this world. And this thing with Selfish with story points is the exact example of Decepticons are not Transformers. They're not going to work together all the time. They're going to be self-motivated. And by hoarding story points, that is 100% a very Decepticon thing. And it will encourage them to think about ways that they can improve themselves and make sure that they have everything that they need. So lore-influenced mechanics that encourage players to play the way that the characters are supposed to be played is ingenious. I don't know if this was intentionally done or is just a byproduct of the system working the way that it does, but it's really, really awesome. And so it keeps going in to other things. Answer the 5 W's. Who are your personalities? What is the primary goal of the campaign? It gives a bunch of different kind of goals for why they would be doing what they're doing. When is your campaign taking place? Where are your primary locations? They do have a lot of different things like Cybertron, colony ships, Cybertronian territories, Earth, which I was impressed. And then why are the characters involved? The why is always more important than the what. So, yeah, all really, really good, useful stuff. And then the second half is just like every thing else for these books is Decepticon Locations, which is basically kind of a map without a map, where it talks about a bunch of different locations and then give plot hooks for each of them. It'll describe the location, give you plot hooks. Describe the location, give you plot hooks. Describe the location, give you plot hooks. And I really love that. I think that's probably the most useful aspect of any campaign setting, is just giving you a huge long list of locations and plot hooks. Because again, even if you're not going to be using this system, the plot hooks themselves take out, proper nouns. Take out Starscream and replace it with someone from your own campaign. The rest of it you can use as plot hooks in your own game. So that's when you can start effectively templating things, and be able to use these plot hooks and these ideas in D&D or in Vampire the Masquerade or any number of a bunch of different game systems, because plot is plot is plot is plot. And it doesn't have to be tied to a specific game system in order for it to still be fun to play. It will play out differently in D&D than it will in Essence 20. I will guarantee that. That doesn't mean that you can't use a plot seed from Essence 20 in D&D or a plot seed from D&D in Essence 20. It's very possible. You just have to understand what things are necessary to the plot seed and what things aren't. Yeah, I was surprised at just how many new places they have in here of just really, really cool things. And I believe the majority of these are actually from the comics, because a lot of them are really, really interesting and fun. So yeah, moving on. Chapter 5, Threats. It's a monster manual. It's the monster manual part. They've got your generic stuff, which are going to be, just your, like, these are your grunts that you kind of deal with every so often. And even the grunts are not that, that boring. There really aren't that many quote-unquote boring characters in this. And then they start talking about Cybertronians, and they even have Cybertronian bureaucrat, threat level 2, so you can fight bureaucrats, because of course you can in Transformers. And then you start getting into the Autobot specific stuff. Generic Autobots are things like Autobot Racer, Autobot Rescue Agent, things like that are just kind of generic if you want to have bad guys that maybe aren't specific named Autobots, but you need more than just, Jazz and Roadblock or something. Except Roadblock, I believe, is a G.I. Joe, but whatever. And then they get into specific Autobots, and I believe every one of these, or at least almost every one, has a full page color art that looks badass. They start off with RC. I think I'm gonna open this one up because it's just nonsense how good this looks. I want to specifically show RC because she's great. Bumblebee, I love Bumblebee. I used to hate Bumblebee, and then he was voiced by Johnny Young Bosch in the War for Cybertron games, and I love him. Look at this artwork of RC. Is that not just amazing? Just killer awesome stuff. And so, yeah, effectively the rest of this chapter is, and it's one of the reasons why it's so long, is that not only do they each have a full page for their stat block, but then they have a full page for artwork. So it's really not that long. And you have Blaster and Bulkhead and Bumblebee and Cliff Jumper. One other thing I really like, they do have Hot Rod in here, which anyone is familiar with the Generation 1 cartoon. Slight spoiler alert for Transformers the movie, which came out in the 80s. Transformers the movie, Autobot, what's his name? Optimus Prime dies, and the Matrix of Leadership is passed on to an Autobot named Hot Rod. When Hot Rod accepts the mantle of, or the Matrix of Leadership, he changes into Rodimus Prime. And so they have a stat block for Hot Rod. They don't have a stat block for Rodimus Prime. And so they just give a little box going, by the way, if you want to make him Rodimus Prime, if that's the part of time that you're doing in, you can make these real quick adjustments to make it work. So I do like the fact that that they go, hey, by the way, here's a huge, huge part of Transformers lore. We're still going to honor it. So I thought that was cool. And yeah, like I said, they're just really, really Ironhide is super badass looking, and Jazz is cool because he's Jazz, and Jetfire, and I never even heard of Cup. Right? I really like, I'm not sure, I think the image for Mirage, I think looks hyper zoomed in to me. And I wonder if they accidentally like messed with the zoom or something on it. I'm going to look at the book. See if it's the exact same in the book. Where are we? We're 155. Omega Supreme, that's a cool one. Yeah, that's what it is. So in the PDF, there's a different image. And it is, yeah, it is a completely separate image for Mirage. I don't know. It's 100% the wrong image. Page 155. If anyone from Renegade is watching this, page 155, you guys have the wrong artwork in the PDF. But this is the actual artwork. But yeah, just really, really good, amazing stuff. They have Optimus Prime gets 2 pages for his stat block. He's the leader of the Autobots. He's got a lot. And then, God, all of these designs just look so good. And I know some of these are from, I wonder, anyone more knowledgeable than I am, are all of these just like colored version of comic books, or did they actually have to get custom art made for this of new stuff? Because the artwork is just insane with just how good it looks. Yeah, like it just over and over and over again, the art looks amazing. Windblade's another one that just looks massively badass. And yeah, that's the threats. Moving on. Chapter 6. Adventure in Disguise. It's the intro adventure. I've talked about so many of these. I don't like giving a ton of plot details away because I prefer everyone to be surprised when they play it. But for the most part, it's an intro adventure. It introduces everything that you would want to. I don't believe this one has what happened in the G.I. Joe one, where it's like, if they're already kind of familiar with Essence 20, you can skip this part. This one, I believe everything is required. And it's a nice introductory adventure. It introduces skill tests in a very easy to understand way. It introduces combat in a very simple, easy way to understand. It's got maps. I love maps. Didn't used to. I used to hate them. And I found that as long as I don't have to make them, they're very, very useful tools in the right situations. If you become too reliant on maps, your players will kind of check out of combat because it changes from them being in a dangerous situation to them moving pieces on a board. But for the most part, if you use maps correctly, they're fun and useful. And yeah, I mean, overall, it's a great introductory adventure that I don't really want to go into too many details about because I don't like giving away information if I don't have to, if that makes sense. So, yeah. So, yeah. So, moving on to final thoughts. So again, overall, I like this book better than the Cobra Codex because it's slightly easier to read. They still have some layout issues. I pointed out a couple of them in here. There needs to be things that draw your eye so that you know where sections start and end. You cannot use the same typeset and font for things that refer to different aspects of the game. It becomes confusing, or at least not in the same section. Aside from those layout gripes, this is a really solid book. The new role is cool. I like it. I think it's interesting. The other role options, I think they're all kind of interesting. The origins themselves are great if they were explained better. They're just not super, they're not explained super well, and to me, personally, will not make sense until you actively try to play a character with one of these origins, because then you will find out exactly how things have to work, because they're not really explained in there. And the new influences are phenomenal. Specifically, the Nemesis influence is amazing and lovely, and I want it to have my babies. It is just great. I love it. And the rest of the book, like I said, I think it does a great job at kind of giving players the tools that they need to actually run, GMs the tools they need to run a successful evil campaign, and players the tools that they need to play successful evil characters. Because like I said, most of the time, and when I say most, I mean like 80 to 90% of evil campaigns fizzle out in a few months. Because players will go, well, I'm evil, so I do evil things. And then everything just goes to hell. And it's not fun. That's not how evil characters work. And so you really do need something like this book or someone guiding you so that you can actually understand how very self-motivated characters can interact and work as a team, because that's how RPGs work. There are a few solo RPGs. They're few and far in between, because it's not what an RPG is designed to be. From the very inception of the first version of D&D, it was always designed to be a group getting together and working together to solve problems. Even when Gary Gygax did individual, one-on-one RPG sessions with players, they still would come together to work together constantly. Like, that was the point of it. And modern RPGs are much more focused on teamwork than the original Dungeons and Dragons in Gary Gygax's basement. So playing characters that are all about themselves and finding reasons for them to work as part of a team can be very difficult for some people. And so a book like this is really, really great for that. Yeah. Anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super important. In the comments down below, we have looked at 3 books now. I am 100% exhausted. Of the 3 new books that have just come out for Essence 20, which one is your personal favorite and why? Do you really dig the Transformers one? Was the Cobra Codex the one that did it for you? Or was it Jump Through Time just the most amazing thing? And if you want to, what specific part of it was your favorite? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, it's all for me today. I will see you guys in the next time. All right? Bye-bye.